Welcome to the Innovation Storytellers podcast. We talk to innovators and disruptors in R&D, product managers, entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs, innovation thought leaders, and their storytellers who help bring their amazing ideas to life. Now, here's your host, Innovation Storyteller, CEO, speaker, and coach to the world's top innovation teams, Susan Lindner.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of Innovation Storytellers. And for the last 20 years, I've been helping innovators and disruptors to tell their stories. 10 acquisitions, hundreds of innovative products, and countless hockey stick growth curves later in both directions. I wanted to share how great innovations get to market and the stories that innovators use to pave the way. I'm super excited to have with me here today Sonja Kresojevic, who is going to be talking with us about innovation from the outside in. So we're going to be talking to, in this series, we've been talking to a lot of consultants who have had experience on the inside of large corporations working on innovation and also on the outside, shedding a new light on what companies need to do to move their innovation forward. Now, Sonja's take on innovation comes at the hands, I guess, of a lot of hard work, but also a lot of challenging times too, of figuring out the ways that humanity intersects with innovation, not just innovation for innovation's sake. And it's this human part of the problem or the challenge of innovation that we're going to focus on today. And I want to give you a little bit of background on Sonja. Sonja and I met at the Innovators Conference in Paris 2 years ago now and have kept in touch ever since, seeing each other on the speaking circuit. But also, every time I hear Sonja speak, I'm reminded once again to come back to the center that innovation is about people first and foremost, and how we keep our eye on how we innovate in the context of a human framework. So just a little bit of background on Sonja. Sonja works as an innovation strategist, a system thinker, a sense maker, speaker, facilitator, always connecting people and initiatives that inspire her at the core. In her approach, she's combined more than 20 years of innovation strategy, digital transformation, and delivery experience with inner leadership work, having gone through lots of deep transformative experiences and studies that cover psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, even poetry and spiritual leadership. Sonja is an amazing advisor, writer, and speaker on a range of topics related to human-centric transformation and conscious leadership, using innovation and purpose to guide her work. And Sonja, your latest venture is the Seed Time Collective, that is focusing on work with leaders who need support navigating this incredible uncertainty that we find ourselves in, and at the same time finding a sense of purpose and co-creating future scenarios as this innovation emerges. I hope I got all of that right, Sonja.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
I guess I would call it the boom. You know, there was a time when you were working happily, right? Plugging along. Well, we'll get to the point of happily. You were chugging along in the bowels of innovation, right? In some of the companies we all know, and found yourself getting to a point where something is not working, right? Something is shifting for you. Tell us a little bit about where you were when you were experiencing this shift and saying there's got to be a better way from the excruciating grind that innovation can be for some of us when we are so passionate about making a change that maybe we forget ourselves in the process. Can you share with us that experience? Where were you and what happened?
I'm very happy to share. I was at Pearson. I was a senior vice president working in the newly formed chief product office, and I guess lucky to be given this amazing role. I moved from London to New York to do the role. It was a global role looking after the whole product strategy and portfolio for the whole company. You know, Pearson is an amazing company, education leader. And it was the biggest challenge I had in my career up to date. Up to that point, I had an amazing team of misfits, I would say, for corporate world that I assembled over time. And we were on this mission to change the company from within and to, inspire people and bring all that we have been reading and learning from others all this lean startup methodology and agile and design thinking infused with obviously all the change management that I was versed in, and really try to change not just how the company worked from innovation entrepreneurship perspective, obviously with huge emphasis on culture and education, but also from what I call the wall of the enterprise, all the nitty gritty of how we make decisions, how we make financial decisions, how we look at the product portfolio, all the meaty stuff in the system that also needs to change. Because often I've seen with clients now, we focus on educational part, on capability building. We give people tools and access to new practices or new teachings. But because we don't help them remove the obstacles in the organizations, it's really hard to have any traction. And I guess lucky enough and silly enough to think that I can actually do all of that, and I can do both at the same time. And so it was this beast of the program that started around the process and ended up being everything else but the process. So
Wow.
we looked at the whole product portfolio from, not just innovation side, but the execution side of the portfolio. We changed the design, the product lifecycle, designed all the criteria, all the practices and tools behind, educated hundreds of coaches in the organization, educated thousands of people in the organization on how to apply all of this, infused thinking at the executive level, changed financial decision making. I work very closely with the CFO and his team around changing how we make financial decisions, what criteria we use, how we evaluate innovation products, because you can't do that in the same way. So we abandoned the whole business case to move into more incremental type of funding, seed type of funding, which at that point, we were talking 6-7 years ago, we could only see in startup world. Not a single big corporate was doing anything like that at scale. There were attempts to do that, on a smaller scale to test how it would work, but not at the scale of the whole portfolio. And so it was an incredible adventure. But the adventure that came at a cost, at the time we were heroes, right? You would go into organization, you would climb the hill every day, you would get knocked off by, multiple people who tell you that this is not possible and can never happen. And it was very much winning hearts and minds type of operation, right? Which I think we were successful because, as you know, we focused on storytelling. We focused on inspirational stories that were coming from the organization. So everyone who had anything to do with us, whether it was a coach or executive who volunteered their team or they're part of the organization, we made sure that we captured those stories, because I was of a very strong opinion that it doesn't matter what I think as a leader of that program. It was more important that people who were on a receiving end of this change had something to talk about, right? In terms of how is it affecting them? How is it changing how they do business? How it's affecting the culture of their team or part of the organization where they work. And those inspirational stories, however hard they were, right? It wasn't just, glorified, this is amazing, but also how hard it is to implement as well.
Yeah.
Those real stories really made the difference. But to answer your question in terms of, my personal journey and why at some point I decided it was just not worth it. It's really hard to do this type of role in a corporate world. It was hard then. It is, I think, probably even harder now because of the things that we don't talk in the organization. We don't talk about what is the personal cost that we are asking people like myself to pay. Where is the support in the organization for people like myself, who we are asking to put everything on the line to deliver this type of change? Are we really removing roadblocks in the organization? Are we giving people enough support? Are we giving them, enough of funding, budgets, all of that? Right. It was a shoestring operation. In the first year, I didn't even have a proper budget. I had money to hire people. And then everything else was done by me making deals with people in the startup world. I would invite a speaker and I wouldn't have money to pay them, but I would give them a free space to run a workshop the next day. And, it was all like that. And obviously over time, the organization saw value. So they started to invest a bit more. But it was very much a startup type mentality inside large organization. But organization that's 100 years old, that is used to working in a certain way, And whereas any other organization, we don't put human at the center of what we do, right? We put system at the center of what we are focusing on. But the human cost of myself, of my team, of other people, that's not something that we really paid any attention to.
Well, Sonja, you raised so many things just in opening this discussion because there are things that we are inherently blind to. When we come to work for a corporation, obviously we know there's a work culture. Obviously, we know that there are systems and processes in place, but over time they become invisible to us and they become just the way we do things here, right? And part of an innovator's job from day one is we will fight against the way we do things here in order to do something new. And so I think you raise a really interesting point in that for innovators, we may just be trying to put out a new product, right? Or something cool or a new service. But so many of us don't focus on the fact that from the moment we begin our work, we will inherently be taking on the status quo in order to bring about the magnificent change that we all hope for. It's nearly impossible to create something, to innovate something and leave the system fully intact, right? As it existed the day before the innovation was there. Because inherently, you're trying to bring about a change. And we never think about the cascading impact of the shift, either from a human perspective, right? Or how it's impacting our coworkers and the hurdles they will now face, the hoops they will now need to jump through. So maybe we can just get a little bit more granular for a moment. So can you give us a little bit more of an example of the innovation that you were bringing about as the chief product officer? Was it a product or were there multiple products that you were hoping to bring about at that time? And can you tell us about the product at all from that time?
So it wasn't individual products because, as I said, I was part of the chief product office. And so we looked at the global product portfolio. So we are talking hundreds, if not thousands of products. That's beyond, without me going into detail of granular level of, individual books. But just to give you a sense of the product portfolio, Pearson at the time had everything from schools, so K-12 sector. So not just offering digital products for K-12, but running actual schools in some of the countries.
Wow.
To catering to higher education in terms of books and digital, to having English as a second language offering. So again, multiple centers and companies around the world, in Brazil, in China. So you have this mix of everything from a book or a test score to, running actual brick and mortar buildings that, come with a different challenge. And so when you have a portfolio that diverse, to come up with a process as to how you're going to bring new products to market, how do you evaluate and experiment when you are opening a new school versus launching a digital product, right? A very different ballgame. And it's inherently old culture. It's a company that grew by acquisitions. It's not even, unified portfolio at the time when I inherited the whole thing. One of the first things we had to do the audit of all the products because we didn't even know how many products we had in the portfolio or where they were in the product life cycle. We were really bad at retiring anything. And so if you have a portfolio that's very skewed towards products that are in sustain and retire stages, you don't leave enough money or team power to go after innovation. And we obviously wanted to infuse that innovation culture into everything we do. And so this was a very comprehensive transformation program because we understood if we were going to give support to individual product teams in terms of this is how we should innovate. These are the tools, the techniques, the methodology, the processes, the support we can give you central in terms of coaching and everything else. Then we also need to help remove all the barriers that are in your way. So you want to bring a new product to market? Great. How you go about it? Who is going to give you funding? Because at the moment, the finance are asking for a comprehensive business case. It was easier literally to get $10 million based on the business case than to get $10K to go and run few experiments and interview teachers. It was impossible to get that kind of funding. You need to go through these hoops. Everyone wants to see a business case. As long as the business case stacks up, you can get whatever funding you want. But you're not going to get funding for something small because no one wants to invest in something small. It's that culture of, I want a big idea and I'm willing to invest a lot. And I want you to promise me, basically, because that's what the business case is,
Right?
A fictional promise that we can deliver the revenue and everything else. Obviously, none of that works. And so we acted as the central team that was coming up with all these fancy new processes and tools and support in terms of education and coaching, but we're also then going as a team and removing all those barriers. So working directly with finance, working with HR, working with other parts of the organization to make sure that the organizational system starts to change so it can accept all these new product ideas that the teams are coming up from.
Right.
And most important piece was the governance. So educating all those decision makers to make different types of decisions, right? So when the team comes in and presents results of an experiment or asks for funding to build an MVP, we wanted to make sure that our executives are asking the right questions, that are then making decisions based on the data that the team is presenting, that there is a contract between what the product team has been asked to do and what the executives are now able to evaluate, because we have trained them as to how to evaluate that. Because the situation we had before that, as any other organization, we focus on the product side. We are going to train teams. We are going to give them support. We had these wonderful examples of teams, in China, interviewing customers and teachers and coming up with, all the evidence, invalidating pretty much every single hypothesis they came up with, and going back to present the results, and the executives saying, we don't care. You have the budget, you have the deadline, we want to see the product.
Wow.
And so we realized there is no point in educating the product side if we don't invest equally in educating the governance side and changing those governance bodies and making sure that they're truly cross-functional and they can make a decision in a meeting and they can make that decision based on data and very quickly. And then we built a comprehensive product portfolio tool, which then started to pull information from all these different products that we were launching in the portfolio and started to evaluate at the portfolio level, which one is performing better, where should we invest more, where should we invest less? Because one of the problems with innovation, as I see it in corporate, it's often completely divorced from the strategy of the organization, right? You can have CEO or chief strategy officer talk about what the strategy is, but when you look at where the money is invested, it's not necessarily invested in those areas.
Right.
And there is no connection to prove, are we advancing the strategy? Are we validating the strategy? Should we change the strategy based on what we are now getting from the data and from the markets and from the customers? So we wanted to close the loop. We wanted strategic hypotheses articulated into portfolio allocation, then articulated into product allocations, and based on real data that were coming from customers, closing that loop and every quarter evaluating and saying, actually, if we, adjust our portfolio, if we move from this part to this part now based on real data, we can either prove or disprove our strategy. Yeah. And so that was a very comprehensive, quite big piece of work that we did around that.
I mean, these are huge organizational shifts, but it also begs the question, if they were willing to throw $10 million at a project before without doing the work that you're describing, how many of those projects failed? There must have been a very high failure tolerance associated with it, or a fear-based model of saying, I'm not willing, let's keep reinvesting in the same stuff that we believe we know what works, but maybe we're losing our competitive edge, right? That's the give and take in innovation.
It's fascinating. And it all comes down to that human-centric approach that we talked about. I think each one of us brings our individual biases to organization. Then you have our team biases. Then you have collective biases. All those things that we think that are true for us, individually, collectively, organizationally. We have built our identity based on that. And so no one would ever tell you risk profile. Of course not. But we do work in this way. This is how we operate, right? We trust these processes, these verbal agreements we have had before, that if you do a business case, that if you do a good job, that if you operate in this market, that even if the market shifts, things are going to go back. I can't tell you how many executive level meetings we had where we talk about what happened 10 years ago, and we talk about how lovely it would be if it could go back in time. And you present what the big shift is, and you have someone say, well, if this continues in this direction, we're going to be out of business. And then someone else at the table says, let's revisit in 6 months.
Oh.
And someone says in that moment, let's revisit in 6 months. That's fear.
Right.
This is individual inability to deal with information that's presented, because the information is presented threatens you as an individual. It doesn't just threaten the organization, what we collectively think it's true. It personally affects you, right? Because you think, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my job? I have a mortgage. I have kids to support. What's going to happen to my team? Am I going to be employable? Am I have to, acquire new skills? There is a huge ego at play that we all have a very strong identity. We identify with our roles. We identify with our jobs, right? This is why we say to people, please go away. You talk about change, but I don't want your change.
Right.
I'm very happy the way we are doing things, right? We have always been doing things in this way. We have been successful in the past. Go away with your fancy new processes and tools, and we don't need that.
And it's amazing, right? Because you're trying to be the clearer of obstacles, right, in the innovation process, right? That's almost, and so that clearer of obstacles, people have built walls with those obstacles, right, to hold their little fiefdom in place. So that's their security system.
Yes.
So take us to the end of your time at Pearson then, and what made you decide to say, I can't keep doing this?
Number of reasons. One, to do with the organization and the constant shift that was happening. There were multiple transformation efforts happening at the same time. In my time there, I think we had 3 or 4 major reorgs. So every year was another reorg. Every reorg meant we were paying more attention to, getting rid of 10% of staff and reducing, then investing. So we can talk about innovation, but the game was still very much, we need to protect the share price. We need to protect the market share that we have right now. So although we were talking about digital, although we were talking about going into all these new directions, it felt very much we're going to do all of that to protect what we have right now, which is selling more books.
Right.
And to work in that culture and to work the way I work, and I bring passion to everything. And, I don't know how to work differently. I need to believe 100% what I'm doing. I really felt I was changing the world. It was the most exciting role that was ever given. But at the time, I didn't know how to do that role and how to show up holistically at work as myself fully and how to take care of myself. And so I ended up working probably 16, 17 hours a day for years. I didn't sleep. I would, I'm a single parent, so I would go to drop him off at school early in the morning, probably take a call before that because, someone in China was already late into their morning, right? Even on my way to school, I would already be in my first meeting, so I wouldn't even speak to my son properly. I would do my work in the office, come home, give him dinner, and then go to work. And, I was sending emails at 3:00 in the morning to my team in London. I wasn't setting a good example for anyone. When you work like that, you don't really set a good example to anyone either.
Because you're not present for everyone, right?
You are not. And I was doing all these crazy trips, 24 hours in London, come back to New York, San Francisco, or, I had teams all over. And so it was really demanding on me in every single possible sense of the world. And I wasn't present at all. I remember, I think that was one of the moments when I realized there was something really badly wrong here. I was at the British Airways lounge at Heathrow and I picked up the Time magazine. It was December. And you know how Time does a little retrospective of the year in their last edition. And I was flipping through the magazine and I was like, oh my God, I slept through all of this. Wow. I had no idea that any of that happened in the world, right?
You worked through all of it. You didn't.
And that was kind of a moment where something needed to change. And so I started working with a coach. Yeah, I would bring laptop to holidays. I mean, I was never off. I would, be by the pool with, my kids and they're splashing and I'm writing emails and, on conference calls in a hotel room and all of that, it. And I started working with a coach and I realized that things needed to change, that all those things that I accomplished, and I accomplished a lot. And, the team won 2 innovation awards and we managed to publish a book about our time at Pearson. None of that meant anything at some point because I was so burned out and I didn't even know how to use the language of burnout yet. I wasn't even fully aware what it was. I just know that I couldn't continue anymore. And there were, circumstances in my personal life, with my kids. And I just felt that I wanted to be a good mom and take care of them. And I felt I couldn't do all of that at the same time. I just didn't have tools that would allow me to take care of myself. I remember when my coach started working with me and when she realized the state I was in, the first thing she did, and you're going to laugh, she called my secretary and told her, you're going to block an hour every morning. She's not coming to work and going straight into meeting. Make sure she has an hour. She can go for a walk. She can go to yoga class, because everything she was suggesting, I was just saying, I don't have time. I don't have time. I was at the state where I was literally going back to back from one meeting to another. I wouldn't even have time to go to a toilet, forget about food. I would come home in the evening and realize I didn't have a single, minute of rest during the day. I didn't eat anything. So it was very, very unhealthy. And yes, I didn't realize that it was possible at the time to do the change I needed on myself and stay in a role. Because to show up fully in all the vulnerability to talk about this back then, I think would have been impossible for me.
Do you feel like the changes that you were asking your coworkers, right, to make as a remover of obstacles, right? It almost sounds like you took into your own personal life. All the obstacles came back to you tenfold. But do you recognize also the stress that change and innovation actually puts on a human in the midst of the process, right? Even when you're trying so hard to remove the obstacles, the simple act of change is one of the most stressful things that happens to the human mind and the human body, period.
Absolutely. And I regret that I didn't realize at the time that there should have been so much more focus on those stories of how we feel personally. There was a lot that we have done around the culture, but as in collective culture, removing those obstacles, talking about how the teams feel, how we should work better together, creating space where people can come and talk about the issues they were facing in their job. But there was a very clear delineation between work self and personal self. And although a person hosted everyone at home and threw dinner parties for my team members and all of that at home about, my personal life with them and everything else, I now realize we should have all done more, talk about and acknowledge how stressful this was, not just for me, but for everyone on the team.
And as a leader, do you think you didn't create the space that you would have liked to, or you wish someone had created the space for you in this scenario to do
there was no space for me. There was no space for me as an organization, as a woman, especially. I have to say that I didn't feel there was any space for me to show up fully and to talk about this or to ask for help. So that is true. I think I tried to create space for my team, but you can be talking about creating the space. You can even be taking care of others. But if they see you not take care of yourself, you need to walk the walk. I made so many mistakes with my kids, and I realized that now because at the time my daughter was struggling because I was showing her this example of a woman who can do anything, right? And she felt that she couldn't measure up, right? But who can measure up to someone who is working 17 hours a day and never complains and is a caretaker and is taking care of everyone, right? That's the role I've taken on early in my childhood. And I have done it to, nth degree with everyone in my life. But you don't want to be that person. You cannot measure up to that. And so she really struggled as a young woman growing up next to that mother. And it wasn't until I left Pearson and started a deeply transformative journey of changing myself and questioning who I am and what my values are and how do I want to show up in the world and, what's important to me, that I started to share all the shadow side, all the negative side, all the struggles and challenges and all the things that were not so nice to share. And all of a sudden I became human, eyes of my kids. So it's not enough to just talk about it. You actually need to show people around you that you're willing to go there, that you're willing to talk about it, that all of that is okay,
And taking your foot off the accelerator.
Our shame, all of that is equally important as our happiness and everything else we want to achieve. I had a moment a couple of weeks ago in London, and I really taken last year, I almost stopped completely because I really wanted to take this time and see what comes up with for me. This is a moment of really big pause for a lot of us. A lot of things are shifting around us, and I wanted to be fully present with it. I didn't want to go into any client engagement with all the agenda of this is how we should work. I wanted to observe what's happening. And so I slowed down my work engagements. I focused on the clients that really needed my help and support. And so I ended up with a lot of spare time. And so it wasn't unusual for me to all of a sudden take a nap in the middle of the day or watch a movie or read a book. And I asked my son a couple of weeks ago, just after lunch, I was in my bed watching a movie at 2:00 in the afternoon. He's a poor kid, online schooling. I'm watching a movie. I mean, this is the example, right? I'm setting now. And I was so naughty that I even asked him to make me coffee. I was lazy enough to get off my bed. So I sent him to make me a nice cappuccino. He comes to my bed and looks at me watching movie and says, when I grow up, I just want to be like you.
Wow. In the best way, right?
In the best possible way, with a bit of cheekiness as in, okay, you're really taking a piss now. But still, it was the best compliment my child could have given me, knowing where I came from, knowing that what I observed that day would have been impossible for me before.
Yeah.
How hard for a workaholic it is to stop and do nothing?
I'm very
exactly.
aware. Yeah. And I'm sure, a lot of our listeners are going, wow, I've never heard someone really articulate just how challenging it is to always carry the banner of change and innovation, because, I always say innovation has as its center movement and momentum, right? I mean, And so you take on your physical body the sense of constant movement, because you feel like if you stop, everything that you've worked for stops. And maybe it's not just innovation, but innovation in particular feels like it has to has almost like a jet propulsion behind it, because you are trying to change so many systems, so many processes simultaneously in order to move, especially large old companies forward and to get onto a track of different thinking. It's going from a steam engine, right, to a Japanese bullet train, and everything that needs to shift in order to make that shift has to happen in a short period of time with very limited resources, the buy-in of thousands of people to make that happen, and an entire culture shift. And it takes a toll on the human brain and the human body, right, which is what we're talking about today. So you made the shift personally, and you kind of said, I'm pulling up the brakes, this is not going. But we're in a very pivotal time right now, right? And you and I have talked about, very similar conversations that are happening out in the world. Well, let's just see what happens after COVID. Maybe things will go back to the way they were, right? And you and I were looking at each other laughing and going, are you kidding? Because when you look at that Time magazine for 2020, what has shifted on the planet in just 1 year?
Yeah, it's incredible. And for anyone to say that we should just continue business as usual, I always say, if you are a huge believer in tools and templates, open up, Osterwalder's environment canvas. And you can tell me that your business model hasn't changed, but just look at your environment, right? Look at everything in your environment that has shifted, from COVID to Brexit in England to, Black Lives Movement, to all the climate changes that we are having, to, civil unrest, to anything possible. I can't even remember everything that has happened last year, right? And continues to happen, you know?
The politics are not
January
settled
has
here.
been, no, they're not settled anywhere, right?
Right.
So all of those factors impact your business model. They impact your workforce. They impact everything. So we cannot pretend that things are not shifting and changing. But if we are still pretending, that's because we personally cannot see what's in front of us. It's like opening the fridge and, whatever you're looking for, it's there on the shelf, but you don't see it. If you're not present, you don't see what's happening around us. You believe in a story, the story that's confirming your identity. So if you're a CEO of a large organization that's under threat right now, and you're worried about yourself and your career, you're in a protective game. That protective game is not just, I need to protect my company and my employees and my shareholders. I need to protect myself. It starts with us. The disconnect starts within. It doesn't start out there, right? And so if you're that threatened, you're not going to see what's happening, right? Your sense of identity is connected to the story of your job, of the success that you have previously, of the position your company had in the marketplace, of how amazing everything is. And you're just seeing evidence that's confirming that reality. You reject everything else, right? I've done, and I'm still doing, an amazing warriorship program training, leadership training with Margaret Wheatley. And she talks and she's teaching us a lot about just our ability to be present and to develop clear seeing, to acknowledge what is happening, to recognize when we have a reaction in our body to what is happening, right? When you look at that environment canvas, and I had sessions with clients just before COVID, and I didn't know COVID was going to happen, but the new Brexit was coming up. So I was using that as a prompt, asking them, okay, let's think about your business model in a year's time. What would be the effect? And they were refusing point blank that anything will be different once Brexit hits. And I now regret not asking them, where in their body do they feel something tightens up when I ask a question, what is going to happen? Because you can recognize it. There is either you feel uncomfortable in your chest, around your heart, or, you have pain in your stomach. My daughter always has pain in her knee. We all react in a different way, but our body is giving us all these clues, right? Yeah. As to how we actually feel about something, but we don't pay any attention.
No, on the contrary, we've been taught to ignore that. Yeah,
exactly. And so if you think about the space for innovation in this large organization, it's tiny. It's basically non-existent, right? Because the space was big, but then the space is reduced by all the biases and all the, contracts that we have made with each other, all the things that we believe to be true individually and collectively until it's this big. And so basically what these executives are telling us, especially now that I'm coming as a consultant, is you go and do your job, but you cannot touch anything around you. So in this almost non-existent space, you go and innovate. There is no innovation there. So there is a pretense of innovation, but there is no true innovation. Like, look at us now. Are we even aware what problems we are trying to solve? Just look at how our governments are responding to what is happening. It's all over the place. Scientists are telling us one thing on Monday, and the second thing on Wednesday. We are using all of this as an excuse to go and put some measures in place, but we don't have a comprehensive policy on anything. We don't know what the strategy is to get out of this crisis. We're not seeing clearly the effect. Everything is interconnected, but we are refusing to see that. Everything is interconnected in any large organization as well. But we refuse to see that because if we saw that, our organizational chart wouldn't be what it is. We wouldn't be working in silos. You will have a CEO who is the only role in the organization who has a comprehensive view of what is happening in that organization. We are asking this poor person to do an impossible job.
Yeah.
Everything else is in silos below that, which means there is no collaboration, there is no innovation, because innovation requires collaboration. It requires space. It requires us to be present and to see the problem, to interact with our customer, to have a conversation and ask, what is really happening for you?
Yeah.
How can we help you in this moment in time?
Yeah. So when you think about speaking to the other innovators in our audience, what's some of the advice that you wish you could give them, given what you've learned about the human side of innovation, the toll it takes, and also the way to do this in a healthy way? What's the advice you give to chief innovation officers or heads of innovation or heads of product when they're thinking about, wow, it's not just I'm making a new toaster, right? Or I'm not just bringing a new form of molecular chemistry to a paint process or a new piece of code of software. What should we be thinking about that keeps us human-centric as opposed to product-centric, service-centric, or even organization-centric? How do we start creating a human-centric process?
Well, I think it starts with us. So, especially as leaders, we have a duty to model the right behavior for our teams and for the rest of the organization.
So what does it look like? What would that be? Because some of this, it's just completely foreign to us.
I know. And this is the thing. This is the question I always get. Where do I start? And I would say, start by getting yourself a good coach or a good therapist or, reading a book, finding a support group in your neighborhood, anything really. It doesn't really matter where you start. The point is that you continue, that you find support, that you find a network, that you find a community, and that you don't come up with excuses as to why is it not possible, because this is not an easy journey, right? First, we start and embark on a journey that we don't know anything about because we haven't been taught at schools how to take care of ourselves properly and how to think in this way and how to recognize what our body is telling us, how to create space how to take care of ourselves properly. The burnout rates at executive level in US before COVID were in 85 to 90% range. So this is an epidemic. This is not few executives here and there. So what is that telling you? That all the MBA schools haven't really equipped us with how to do this in a different way. And as a result, we don't create that space for employees. We don't create space for others on our team. We don't create that space for our families and our kids. The other thing I would say is learn to fall in love with questions. You talked about the speed and how innovation is all about the speed. And I agree. But only once we know what we are doing, once we confirm that we are solving the right question, that we are solving the right problem for our customers. If we haven't validated that, just going to market with a bad solution is not going to bring you the results you want. And I don't think we spend enough time in the questioning part, in the validating the question and the problem part. I think whatever the question is to start with, whether it's something you deal with individually or collectively, it's always the wrong question. We don't know how to ask right questions.
So we should know that the questions we're asking are wrong from the beginning.
We need to know that we're asking the wrong questions. I think we need to recognize that we are obsessed with finding the answer or solution, because this is how we have been pre-programmed by the school system, right? As long as you can show the correct answer at the test, no one cares about how you got there. For me, all I care is what happens in between questions and answer, because the answer at the end, the solution, sometimes irrelevant. What you were supposed to learn actually happened in the process of questioning. That's the richness of the data. This is where the learning happens. But to recognize that learning, you need to be present. So you need to learn how to be present with yourself. So that requires some sort of mindfulness practice, meditation, journaling, walking. When you start to recognize those, really, I'm calling them now micro answers. They're not answer to a big question, but they're the data points that the universe is making available to you.
They're like little hints along the way.
They're little hints. And so I started recording them for myself now. And I even had like a wall of gratitude on my wall in London last year, where I was capturing those small moments, not big things that happen. That's easy to remember, recognize, but smaller things, something I have learned, a small act of kindness that happened, whether by myself. And I think we need to learn that. And so that questioning loop of asking a question or creating a space in which we can explore the question, in which we can recognize all the barriers we put in front of us that are preventing us from seeing the solution. I think that needs to happen first. So it's almost like multiple loops of questioning, working with the space, removing obstacles until either new real question emerges, or we get the answer, or we realize that everything we needed to get out of that process we already received, and we don't even need to go down the path further.
Wow.
And that's, I think, what we need to do, because I have seen organization after organization, government after government, they want to go fast, right? And we want to deliver. And what we deliver at the end, you hear from customers, you hear from your citizens. They are like, this is not what I need. This is not what I asked for. Did you even bother to, observe my problem at the moment, right? No one is thinking about how do we actually help people in this moment now? What is it that people need? Even with stimulus checks, are we actually interviewing any citizens? Do we have enough data as to what people need? Are we just doing what every corporate does, peanut butter spreading? Let's give everyone $600 or $700 or whatever the amount is, right? But this is not what people need right now. Some may need more, some may need less. Some may need a job, some may need help with kids. Some may not need money, need some, the third thing. We need to know what we are asking before we can go into solving it. And I think we are too impatient, right? And we have that resistance in us, in the system as well, that's preventing us from seeing clearly. And I think a lot of work in the next couple months and this year needs to be spent in society and in organization in removing the obstacles, whether the old contracts still stand, right? What have you learned in the last 12 months that we can let go of? Until we let go and create space, there will be no space for anything new. We will continue to solve the old problems, the problems that are not relevant anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like, it's not a surprise that
the world has changed.
Yeah, like Marie Kondo and downsizing, right? Our closets, reorganizing and making tidy was so emblematic of the first
Yes.
part of the pandemic, right? Where we were all in lockdown. It's like time to clean out all the closets because intuitively we knew we're making way for something new. We're shedding those old skins and we
Absolutely. And
want to
look at
feel
our
good about
lives.
getting rid of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
To,
Just think about where we have invested our time and energy over the last 12 months. It was in simplifying our lives, in spending more time with our loved ones, in taking care of ourselves. As you said before we started this call, plans or, cooking food for someone else. All of that is important as well. It's not just our job that, we need to put on a shrine. It's our lives as well. And
That's
so
right.
all of this affects how we look at work as well.
So I always ask my guests at the end of our time together a couple of hot seat questions and get some spontaneous answers. So if I ask you the question, innovation is, and finish that sentence for me, innovation is what?
Inquiry.
Inquiry. Mm-hmm. And what is an innovation that you most admire when you look at the human course of innovation? What's an innovation that you admire?
I think there's a lot that's happening in the health space at the moment that seems quite remarkable in terms of, not just extending human life, but offering people a better quality of life, offering people a more holistic approach to their own health, empowering people so they can take care of themselves in a different way. And I'm really passionate in exploring that field and learning more for myself. So
is this a
I think
device? Is this a practice? What do you see?
I think I'm not so keen on tools or devices necessarily, although there are some amazing products on the market as well. But I think more the process of getting to know our bodies in a more holistic way, truly body, mind, spirit, soul, and learning how powerful we are and how able we are to heal ourselves, learning how to extract that knowledge out of ourselves, I think is one of the things that I'm most impressed. And I think the movement is growing in and day out. I think there's so many practitioners, so many people who are really starting to pay attention, whether it's, doubling down on their mindfulness practice or how they eat or, their spiritual health. And I think a lot of people are talking more and more as to how we bring that to the workplace as well, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah. So that innovation sounds very ancient simultaneously. We're just
Yes.
reviving a very old innovation that we have forgotten about as work.
Well, I'm a huge believer that all that knowledge has always been available, but because of how we have been brought up, we were unable to see it and access it. So I think this process of inner journeying is removing all the obstacles and barriers so that we can regain access to what has been given to start with.
Yeah. And if there's one innovation you could have worked on, one that you look at and be like, darn, if I could have been part of that team making that cool thing or participating in that cool shift, what would that be?
Anything to do with education, really. I don't think it's just one specific product. I'm really passionate about changing education for our kids. If there is one area where I really want to spend more time going forward as well, is in education, because it's quite sad that things haven't shifted as much as they need to shift. And I think the complete revamp needs to happen. Education, what we teach our kids, really bringing all that mindfulness and everything else to the classroom as well. Our kids are amazing. They're so resilient, but, we send them to school where they become deeply conditioned by our existing system. And so I would love to be part of a team that changes that.
Sonja, thank you so much for joining us today on Innovation Storytellers. We loved your story and thank you for getting personal and real and raw with us. We are so busy putting our foot down on the innovation accelerator. Sometimes we forget to hit the brakes and take time for ourselves. And I think you've reminded us it's a really important part to model the innovation of ourselves in the process of innovating the processes
Absolutely.
around us.
And then, if I can just finish with one thing, when we slow down, we get access to so much inner creativity, to so much more inner wisdom. I do more now in a couple of hours a day than I did in 17 hours running around. And so it's really remarkable. It's counterintuitive, but
Right.
It's remarkable to observe and to realize that actually, we don't need to be anywhere for 8 to 10 hours. We can do our work in a shorter number of hours if we create an environment in which we can flourish. And so I really like to encourage everyone to start paying more attention to what's happening and find joy and fun.
So Sonja, where can people connect with you and certainly learn more about your work? Where can we direct them?
Well, my LinkedIn, I can also share my email address with you if you want to include that. So
yeah, we'll put that on the page, and where they can find Seed Collective, right? And some of the work that you're doing with large corporations too.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Sonja, thank you so much for joining us today.
This innovation story has ended, but yours is just beginning. Go to innovationstorytellers.com, download the free Innovation Storytelling Blueprint, and sign up to pre-order Susan's book, Innovation Storytelling. Get the resources, runway, and recognition you deserve due out this spring. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until the next innovation story.